Candles. Finally getting to that candle portion of the show. For all you people interested in candles, I've got a sample of what a chunk votive is. It's just, rather than a solid color votive, you put colored chunks of wax into your mold and then pour a clear, or as clear as you can get, overpour of wax so that the colors show through a little bit. I know it's probably hard to see at the very back there, but I'll just pass this around. If you guys don't mind, you can quickly pass it from table to table so you can see what they look like when they're done. And as I mentioned, this is a special wax. It's in your notes. I pretty much did the directions pretty detailed in your notes there. A special IGI wax that is made. It's $47.94, and it is designed especially for votives. And the first candle making tip that I give folks who are interested in making candles is use the right wax for the right job. If you want to make votives, don't use a container wax. If you want to make fillers, don't use. So I always try to get the wax that's designed for that job and do the best job I can do. A couple of tips if you're not familiar with working with wax. Number one, never ever leave your melting wax unattended. It can go from barely melted to blazing hot and smoking up your room in no time flat. Ask me how I know. I would recommend that you either just keep an eye on that thermometer at all times. I just use a regular Canadian thermometer in my pour pots. Or get yourself one of those thermometers that you can set to have an alarm go off when it reaches your desired temperature. For this wax, I would desire the temperature of 175, so I would set it to beat that meter. For another thing I do at home is I just set a timer to remind me to come back and check my wax every couple of minutes so I don't blow it off and space out. Okay, your equipment's there, your ingredients are there. Let's see here. Okay, first thing you want to do is to make your chunks. Of course, I like to do it the day ahead so they're nice and cold. I'm using an old beat up, nasty baking pan here. I don't really care anymore about it getting cut up and such. And I melted my wax to 175. I'm using the same wax for the chunks and the overpour. The advantage to using the same wax is they have the same melt point, the same burn characteristics, so you know when you burn your candle it's going to be right. I brought my wax up to the temperature of 175. Then I added a little bit of color and scent. And I would recommend you don't go too heavy-handed on the color. If you put too much color in a candle, it can clog your wick. And I also recommend that you follow the manufacturer's scent load guidelines too. Don't ever put too much, don't think, I'm just going to put a little extra fragrance in there. Because wax is a lot like a sponge. It can only hold so much fragrance and then it just seeps out and you're at risk for some bad things happening. So on this particular wax, the recommended fragrance load is 6%, which is roughly 1 ounce of fragrance per pound of wax. So in this case, I melted my wax, added my fragrance and color. I always put my fragrance oil in first so that I can see if it's incorporated into the wax. Once I add the color, then it obscures it and I can't tell if I've got it mixed in all the way. A lot of times what I'll do is use gently a wire whisk to get my fragrance oil in there nice and incorporated. Or you can use one of these highly expensive, super fancy coffee stirrers from Starbucks. After I got it all mixed up together, I poured it into here and then just waited for it to get set up to where it was solid but still warm to the touch. And once this pan full of wax was solid enough for me to cut, I just cut it into squares just like I'm cutting brownies. If you get to the middle and it's still molten, you might need to hold off a bit. But typically what will happen is your outer sides are a little bit harder, and obviously the inner side, which cools down slower, takes longer. But just cut it like you're cutting into little tiny. Wait until your chunks are thoroughly cool. And I put this in your notes too because I've been tempted. I think, wow, I want to see how these chunks turned out, so they're still warm, and I take them all apart and they're yucky. It really does work better if you wait till they're completely cool. Then you get nice clean chunks and you don't have all that fuzzy stuff all over the place. All right, so after you pour your chunks, and I've got a handful of orange chunks that I made ahead of time here that I scented. I'm not going to scent my overpour wax. You can, but you want to be sure to try and use a fragrance that's not going to discolor your overpour wax. You want it to be as opaque as possible, or excuse me, as translucent as possible so the color shows through. You can add a tinge of color. I've done like dark brown chunks with a super light ivory or light tan overpour, and that worked okay. But if you add a whole bunch of color, it's going to kind of ruin the effect. So I just take these votive molds, and these are standard 15-hour votive molds. They hold about 2 ounces of wax. And in order to help me get the candle out when it's finished and I'm ready to release it, I went ahead and put in a light coat of oil, mineral oil. I normally use spray. They have a candle release spray you can use, but I didn't want to travel with it and get the nice airlines people all ticked off at me, so I left that alone. And I'm going to take about 1 ounce of the chunks. About approximately 1 ounce of your finished votive will be chunks, and approximately 1 ounce is overpour, so that'll help you judge how much you need to make. And as you're filling your mold, you want to tap it down so you get those chunks as compressed as possible. And as you'll see on the sample that's coming around, you want to leave some sticking out of the mold because it just looks cool. I'm tapping it down really well. Christy's handling my overpour here for me because I can't chew gum and walk at the same time. Make sure we haven't missed anything here. Okay, about ready? Okay. This particular wax is recommended you melt it to 165 to 185, I believe. I just go right in the middle, 175, and pour at that temperature. One thing that you can do when you're working with these kind of votives is play around with different pouring temperatures. When you pour your overpour hotter, you're going to get a smoother finished texture. It's going to be easier to release from the mold, but you're at risk for melting some of your little chunkies. So I like to pour a little cooler, and I get a nice cool finished texture. You'll see the one that I'm sending around has kind of, little texture. Roasting here? Sorry about that. I like to pour my wax on top of some wax paper so that if I spill, I can just pick it right off. Good to go there? Here you go. When you pour your overpour, you want to aim for the center of the cup. Oh, did I mention wick pins? Sorry. I use a wick pin. A wick pin is a handy-dandy device. Whoever invented it should get a Nobel Prize, in my opinion. It goes right inside your votive mold so that it leaves a hole for the wick and you can insert the wick in later. And that's what I did with that one that's going around. That way you can not mess around with the wicking, because there's no way to do a chunk mold and then stick the wick down in there. You're just going to hit chunks. You can do it with a solid votive, but not with a chunk votive. So I'm just going to pour this. Get super hot, super fast. I'm kind of aiming for the middle here.
Why do you not put the wick in?
You can with a solid votive, but with a chunk votive you can't because when you do a regular votive, you pour the votive and then you wait for the wax to coagulate on the bottom and then you jam the wax down into that stick it down into that thick wax.
You don't put the wick in first and then...
Not on a chunk, no. There's no way to do it because when you try to jam it down in, there'll be chunks in your way.
No, I meant like the hot glue on the bottom of it, stick it in and then wait and then put your chunks in and then pour.
Well, but then it'll be glued to your cup and you want the votive to release with the wick.
Oh, never mind.
I understand what you're saying. That's what you do for containers, though. You stick that sucker down in there and let it stick. Okay, this will take a little bit to cool. But meanwhile, you guys can see the sample that's coming around, and let me make sure I've covered all. Oh, always burn votives in a tight-fitting container made for votives. Don't just let them sit on the counter and let wax all over the place. They're meant to be burned in the special votive holder because they will liquefy completely. Okay, anything else? La-di-da. La-la-la. I think I've covered pretty much anything else. If you guys have any questions, don't make them too hard. Don't intimidate me now. Oh, wicks. That might be helpful. I have this on your information, but I use a 36-24-24 zinc core wick with this particular wax. And I use the pre-tabbed wick assemblies with these. I don't have to think with crimping the wick and priming it, getting it all coated with wax. These are ready to go. You just jam them right up there, and this part here kind of sticks into the wax so that it stays. Anytime you decide to branch out and try different fragrance and dye combinations, You're going to need to test again on test burn and see if your wick is either burning too hot or too cool.